Communications, Sensible Prepper Communications. Well, Don, as I was telling you, as far as I'm concerned, the most important things any of us should have: receiver type radios where we're going to get our information, and then transceivers where we're going to communicate with people. But the most important thing for any sensible prepper to have is going to be a multi-band capable handheld scanner. Typical handheld scanners are like these two Radio Shack models I'm holding. You can buy them still at Radio Shack. Great place to look is at flea markets or garage sales, and you can pick them up for nothing. To me, this is probably the single most critical thing a prepper could have to stay aware of what's going on around them. With these handheld scanners, you get police, fire, rescue, aircraft. Most of these handheld scanners have the amateur radio, VHF, and UHF bands on them, and almost all of them have the weather service in them. So in that one compact, portable, handheld radio, you're going to be able to tell what's going on all around you in your immediate area, your local area, or regionally. To me, that's critical.
Right. Wow.
All of us should have these. Well, when we were talking about scanners, another option is a desktop type scanner, and you can still buy new ones, or you can generally find them around flea markets. This one's older, but again, for fire, police, emergency services, ambulances, VHF, UHF, amateur radio bands, weather, it's all right in that one scanner. We should include in here as well, I don't have one laying around, but just a simple AM/FM radio. The scanner with an AM/FM radio and some type of weather radio. Here's an old little realistic. You can still find these at garage sales anywhere. They cost almost nothing. The modern weather radios have built-in automatic alert systems. So if you got the radio on properly and you've got it programmed, if there's an alert in your area, the radio automatically comes on and gives you that alert. Those are the most critical things in my book that any of us should have, together with our little simple AM/FM radios. The next level needs to be a shortwave radio. Shortwave radios is going to tell us what's going on in the world. Really important. If we had EMP, any of these kinds of national or international things that we're concerned about, then the next step up's got to be a shortwave radio. You can find portable models, battery powered. You can find some that are hand crank powered. Something as simple as a wire dipole, in other words, a piece of wire, but that will greatly enhance your receive capabilities. So that's something to consider. If we do nothing else, as responsible, sensible preppers, we'll have those bases covered. We won't have spent a lot of money. Most of them we can find used at flea markets.
So what we're really talking about is the first part is just having receivable capability, being able to receive. So all these are just receivers.
That's right.
You can't send out a signal from them.
All the things that we're talking about right now are just receivers. And to me, that's first level, basic prepper stuff. We have to have it. Next step up would be to get into the world of transceivers, where we need to communicate now. Most of us are familiar with the family radio service or FRS radios. A lot of us have these already. Our kids might have them and play with them. For very localized, within a mile, couple of mile range, these are fantastic little radios, no licenses, battery powered, multi-channel. Some of them have some privacy capabilities. So if we're in a neighborhood or in a compound or in a business location, in other words, within a very short distance of a mile or a few miles, these things are fantastic for two-way communications. These things are very inexpensive. There's a step up from the FRS to the GMRS. Those do require a license in certain circumstances because they have more power. They transmit with more power. So there's some licensing that needs to come along with that.
Isn't it pretty much a card just sent in? Is that?
I believe it's just an application that you mail in. There's no testing or anything.
Now let me ask you something.
But they do have a greater range.
Right. Let me ask you a question. A lot of times you'll see these that'll have like 16 miles and 20 miles. I mean,
ideal locations. You're on top of Mount Mitchell. Batteries are fully charged. It's on one of these beautiful days when the propagation for broadcast signals is optimized, but every day, day to day, they will not get that range. Another consideration would be CB, the old CB radios. A lot of people are still using them. You still see them in cars. The truckers are still using them. But you can buy little handheld 40-channel CB radios like this one, Radio Shack. You can outfit these so that you can have an external microphone on them, plug them into your car, plug them. You can even have an external antenna, and you'll get a little bit greater range. Again, we're talking with all of these low power. We're talking limited range.
What would be the range on the CB, you think?
Again, the most important thing anybody will tell you about range with anything like FRS, GMRS, or CB is it's going to be dependent on the terrain, the antennas you're using. There's no hard and fast rule. And the amount of power that you're putting out. Most all CB radios, and by law, are limited to less than 5 watts. I'm not sure exactly what it is now, but I know it's less than 5 watts. 5 watts or less. When we're talking about CB radios, a mobile radio for the car would start at this low end of the scale right here with something like this little Radio Shack. These things are under $50. I'm not sure what they're selling for now, but you might be able to find these for as low as $39 or something.
Well, I bought a couple of these at a flea market for $5 a piece.
Yeah.
With mics and everything. So.
Absolutely. I put them in all of our cars. This is my son's car. It's there just to have it as a backup in the event that we're running up and down the interstate and all of a sudden everything comes to a halt. We can almost immediately find out what's really going on with a simple little cheap inexpensive CB radio. Especially with an inexpensive CB, you want as good an antenna as you can afford, because that's going to make all the difference in the world in your receive and transmit. One other thing we didn't talk about, but there are tons and tons of CB base station radios available to you. They're still selling them new, but again, a fantastic thing to go find at the flea market. I hesitate to give you mileage because it's going to vary on the terrain and all kinds of things, but certainly very locally, now you've got a dependable little means by which to communicate with each other. One thing I'll mention now, though, is that when we're talking about something like CB, FRS, GMRS radios, just keep in mind that you're not going to have a whole lot of privacy. Even when you select privacy modes in some of these kinds of radios, that doesn't mean that others are not going to hear what you're saying. YouTube's got some fantastic resources for some simple ways to use some simple code or code language if you're communicating and you don't want others to know what you're talking about. Another service that we should talk about, particularly for people that live in coastal regions, the marine VHF band. Most all boats in coastal areas are outfitted with marine radios for VHF. For those of us that do inland boating, a lot of us might have the handheld marine VHF radios. Now with some of your handheld scanners, you may be able to tune into those frequencies and be able to monitor them. But if you want to be able to communicate with other people using marine service, a good handheld marine VHF radio would be an option. But if we really want to get serious about two-way communications, then taking the next step into amateur radio or ham radio is something to consider. Once we make that jump, we are talking about having to get a license, and we are talking about having to do some study to take some tests. We also need to mention at this point that when it comes to amateur and ham radio, the amateur radios that have done their work, studied, taken their tests, we should respect them and respect the law, which is that we shouldn't be using amateur radio frequencies without a proper license. You could wind up getting fined, and the FCC doles out some pretty healthy fines. Abuse of those bands, it can be as much as, and in fact I've heard people say it starts out at $10,000. I'm not sure. But we don't want to use amateur radios unless we're licensed to use them. Once we get into amateur radio, generally speaking, when you start out with a technician class license, you will have studied, you will have taken your test, and you will get some operating privileges in the VHF and UHF bands. We won't get into a lot of details about all the different bands and all the different licensing levels and privileges, but usually most people start out at that level, so they're getting involved in VHF and UHF radios, which can be mobile radios, base station radios. They can be handheld radios. And you're given certain parts of the radio spectrum that you're licensed to operate in. It's very enjoyable. There's a lot of activity on these bands, a lot of great people, and one thing that we can say for certain is there's a big distinction between amateur radio or ham radio and CB radio. There's a huge difference. This is kind of like a Wild West with CB, and very little restrictions, and you're liable to hear all kinds of stuff there. Amateur radio operators, ham radio operators, are much more disciplined, use proper protocols and proper operating procedures, so it's not the Wild Wild West. Recommend that for sensible preppers that are thinking about getting into communications on a more serious level, you consider and do some research on the Amateur Radio Relay League's website, ARRL. Great resource to learn more about it. YouTube is just filled full of all kinds of information on amateur radio. Most people are looking at maybe starting out with mobile type radios. This particular radio happens to be a dual band radio, which is 2 meters and 440. This particular radio is 220. All in the VHF UHF part of the spectrum for amateur radio use. And the next step, or another step that you can take, is getting into the handheld radios. These are fantastic for longer distance communications. Amateur radios like these, handheld radios like these, you know, we've got those repeater capabilities that give us tremendous amount of distance. What we're looking at here is just one example of a amateur radio, ham radio. This is a 2 meter radio and a mobile installation. Comes with, you know, the hand mics. Some of them, the higher end ones, will have the DTMF keypads on them. So that gives you all the controls right here for the radio, right here in your hand. Vertical antennas for VHF, UHF antennas. I have beam antennas for VHF and UHF, and I have a multi-band dipole wire antenna for my HF stuff.
Okay, here we go. And as always, thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more sensible prepping and survival. God bless America. Long live the Republic.